Welcome back to part 2. In part 1 I realised I left a few things out and I'd rather re-clarify them, so we're going to just focus on how we can have our door close and transition between those states, with a little bit of added bonus information about how you could trigger different animations depending on what key press, if the key press takes place while you're within the trigger zone. So let's do that, then add some small animated details, look at animation events to fire sound effects off, have a look at character animation states, and then import custom character animations, which is always painless. It isn't, it's usually a pain in the bum, but let's have a look at what we've got. So currently what I've got within our scene, I haven't really done much to it since part 1, but what we have got from our previous thing is our script, which opens our door, and we currently say if the other thing enters into the zone and that's the player, we go and set is opening to true. Well, now what we need to think about is in our animation state machine, how do we close the door? So we could add a transition to go to door close, and then we could add another transition from door close back to door open, but that will just ping pong forever. It will open, it will close, it will open, it will close. So what we need to make sure is that the door opening state, or we go from open to close if the condition is true. If is opening is false, then we go back to close, and then if it's true, we go back to the open animation, and it will blend these two states together as effectively as it can. The problem is if it gets halfway through the door open animation, it will then try and jump to the door close one, which is not ideal. So what I'm interested in here is, has exit time? Yes, absolutely. I want the door to completely open and get to its final position before we try and close it, because the close animation is dependent on being at that final point. I'll show you what I mean. So I've just quickly experimented with putting some audio sources on these. I'm going to remove them and we'll look at those in a second. But what we're interested in here with our door system, I'm just going to play the game, walk over to the door, and it plays the open animation. Again, if I just move the animator so it's snapped over here, you can hopefully see that it's playing the door open animation and it remains open. However, if I toggle this is opening back to false, what I expect to see is that it will transition, which is what we see there. Because of has exit time, there was a pause, and then you can see it's closing and finishing its thing. And I can just toggle that again. It waits and waits and waits and waits for it to finish, and then should hopefully return. Let's make sure that's the behaviour that we get. Yes, it is. So there's a couple of ways we can polish that up, but the idea is that is clearly working. We set up our states where our door can close and close can open in a way that makes sense. But what we're just going to add very quickly to this script is, rather than on trigger enter, if that thing was the player, do this. What I'm interested in instead is saying on trigger stay, has something remained within this area? And if something has remained in that area, and if that thing was the player, now what I'm interested in is if input.getKey, so a key on our keyboard, which by default usually is E for interact, so keycode .E. So if we press the E key while we stayed within this zone and we are still the player, then it will toggle to true. What we can do then is, rather than setting it to true, we're going to turn this into a toggle where it will become whatever it currently isn't. And this is why booleans are valuable. So right now I'll walk over to the zone, it should remain shut. I walk into it, nothing happens. I stay in it and I press the E key. I press the E key. Well, that didn't go well. What's going on here? What's going on with my animator? It is playing door open. That just was a suspiciously long pause. I don't trust that. Try it again. I'm walking within the trigger zone. Pressing E. What is the animator doing? It's still doing nothing. Weird. I think I can see the problem. Get key down. Is that better? Might be. See if this works. If not, we'll just abandon it as a bad idea. Part of the joys of problem solving on the fly. That's better. So instead of get key down, I replace that with get key. So what I've just said, that what we're going to do here is, rather than setting it to true, which will always open the door, we want to set it to what it currently isn't. So is opening, currently we're setting it to true. But what I want to get is what is opening at the moment, and flip it on its head. So if it's true, it becomes false. If it's false, it becomes true. To do that, rather than typing the word true, I'm going to get the anim value. And instead of setting a boolean like I was doing here, I'm going to get a boolean. Again, in brackets, in double quotes, I need to know the name of the boolean I'm looking for. Is opening. So that becomes really quite difficult to read, but basically we're saying I want to set the is opening value to whatever it currently is, which seems a bit weird. That's not going to change anything. But to flip a boolean value on its head, to turn from true to false and false to true, we stick an exclamation mark at the front of it, and that flips the logic, it inverts the logic. So what we should now have is, if it is currently true, if I put this again over here so I can see what it's doing, and all I care about is that is opening variable. Does it toggle between true and false? When I walk over to it and press the E key, that's all I care about. I've walked into the zone, nothing should happen. I press the E key, it's on, it's off, it's on, it's off, it's on, it's off. The problem is, the line of code I've used I think is not really desirable. I'm going to go back to get key down. I think that is better. You could see there that it was flickering, because every frame I was holding it down, it was turning it on and off, which was not ideal. I want it to be one tap. That's on, that's off, that's on, that's off. But of course the door is opening and it won't change until I've pressed it back. It's quite a long exit time. We can fiddle with these values to change that, but for the time being you can obviously see that that's working. So I'll just leave that code there for you, but basically what it's just saying, on trigger stay, while I'm within the zone, see if that thing was the player that's in the zone, and if they are pressing the E key, set the open state to what it currently isn't, and that's just toggling it. In VR, this is actually easier than this. You don't need any code. But just while we're dealing with 3D, it's an interesting thing to see the logic of. So the next step on our list, we wanted to look at animating the small animated details. So really simple. I've got a bunch of little lights. Let's make them do stuff. So let's talk about rotation for a second. I've got this warning light object, which is a part of the environment. So the warning light, I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to create an animation where it will rotate thusly. Now you saw there that as I rotated it, it's rotating oddly. And it's rotating oddly because its point of origin is off. So I'm going to change this setting here from local to global. no, it's still really not going to like me. So what I'm going to do instead is you've got this cylinder, which is the back part. What I'm going to do is take the capsule and the spotlight and I'm going to make them children of the cylinder. I'm going to rotate the cylinder. That looks better. So just again, because that's quite difficult, I selected the capsule, spotlight and I dragged them onto the cylinder, which made them a child. What I'm now going to do with the parent selected, remember we animate the parent, animation, create a new animation. I'm going to call this spotlight, and that's going to live in the animations folder. And all this spotlight is going to do is, over the course of 1/2 second, the cylinder is going to perform a full 360 rotation. And this is where things are going to get interesting. Just making sure I'm rotating on the right axis. So if I type 360, there we go. Or I could select it. Again, getting the right axis is important, but rotations are actually harder than you think. Let's do a full 360. There we go. And this is what I wanted to show you. The engine just goes, there's an easier way to do that rotation. I'll rotate this way instead. So rotations are not always easy. What is actually probably better is to say at the 15 or 0.15 mark, perform a 180, and then at the whatever mark you want to perform an additional 180. And I'm just eyeballing this, there we go. And it will still give you some really wild results, because rotations are not easy for a computer to do. There's actually a lot going on under the hood that is not obvious. So all I'm going to do here is I'm going to see what can I do that would be interesting. So can we get away with a 180? Nope. Can I get away with just rotating the spotlight? Yes. So let's rotate this spotlight again. 180. So you can see it was picking up peculiarities because of the way it inherits behaviour from its parent. That's why this is called the hierarchy, because it's a hierarchical structure. So I've just rotated that spotlight and that spotlight 180 degrees independently, and I actually do want it to loop this time. So if I go to the warning light and I look at its animator, you'll see that spotlight is the animation, and double clicking it'll loop. Yeah, I want that behaviour, I do want it to loop. I want it to repeat everything that we've got. It still may not look perfect, and hopefully you guys can see there's a weird jitter to it. So I'm going to select both of those spotlights again, and I'm going to extend the animation. So I'm going to move those keyframes to about the 0.45 second mark, but you'll still see the jitter. It's not that it's too quick, it's because there's a pause. So you can see there it's doing the 180 and then restarting. That's to do with the animation curve. So with the light selected, I'm going to click on this curve, and what you can see if I zoom out and zoom out and zoom out and zoom out and zoom out is, I may have to make this a bit larger. This is for this spotlight, the curve of that rotation, and for people who are used to graphing things, this will make a bit of sense. So it's looping, so you can see it's looping, but what we've got is it slowly speeds up, accelerates, and then slows down, and then when you do the other half of the animation, it has to speed up, get to speed, and then slow down, which is not the behaviour you want of a constantly spinning light. So with spotlight, I'm going to drag the anchor point, so it's pointing that way. I'm going to drag this anchor point, so it's pointing that way. So now we've got a linear straight line. If you remember what we did when we spoke about sound effects, you can see why that's important. And I'm now going to do the same for the other one. I'm going to grab the end point and move it all the way down here. And I'm going to grab the end point and move it all the way up here. And let's see if that resolves our issue. Animation is something that takes a lot of skill and time and practice. If this don't make sense, don't worry. That looks a lot smoother, but a little bit twitchy because I wasn't perfect in the way that I did it. So your job is to now go and see if you can make this red light blink. Give the video a pause. Can you make that blink and make that repeat over and over again? Go and have some fun. Go do that now. Pause the video. Unpause the video. So let's see what else we can do for our game. So what I'm now interested in, now we've hopefully animated some of the details, let's look at how we can use animation events. So what we've got in our animator, I'm going to go back to our door system that we created, and you'll notice we've got these keyframes, which are these little star shapes, little diamond shapes. But we can also add what's called an event. So let's imagine that when the animation reaches a certain point, let's say here, we want it to start making a sound effect. Now if we added a sound effect, if we added an audio source to an object and we told it to play automatically, well, that would be playing at the wrong time. It would be playing all the time. Whereas we're going to say add an event, and I'm going to add two of them. I'm going to add an event there, and I'm going to add an event just at this point here at the 180 frames, 3-second mark. Add another event, that button there. You can then use these events to hook into code. So we can write a function that will say, alright, go find a sound effect and play it. So we're not going to do any more animation. The animation's done for our door. But with our door selected, so the door, not the door arm, I'm going to add an audio source. And in this package, you'll see that there's a couple of sound effects that I've already got. One that sounds like this, and one that sounds like this. You can use them however you like, but I imagined that the first audio source on the door, if I drag this louder one onto that audio clip, and I'm going to have a second audio source, because you can have as many audio sources on objects as you like. I don't want it to play on awake, I don't want it to loop, but if you remember, I do want spatial blend to be 3D. I'm going to right click and copy that component, and I'm going to right click and paste component as new. So I've now just got a duplicate down here, and I'm just going to have that there. Exact same values, that's why I copy pasted it, just saved into doing it again. But I don't want it to play on awake, so we're going to use our events to fire off some code that says go get these audio sources and go play them. Now this may be a little bit more complicated because I've got two audio sources. We shall see. So I need a new script on our door. I'm going to put it on the door system. Why not? Yes, let's do this. So I'm going to write a new script on the door system, and this is going to be called Play Sounds. Write a new script, please. Has it done that? Again, we don't care about our start or update functions. Our Play Sounds class now needs to know the two audio sources that we care about. So I want them to be public, and they are audio sources. And I'm going to call this loud sound, and I'm going to call the other one long sound. And all I'm going to write is a custom function, public void. I'm going to call this play. I'm going to give it a capital P. Let's see if it likes that. That's not at all what I wanted. There we go. I'm just trying to pick a name that hasn't already been chosen. So I'm calling this public void play both sounds, open and close regular brackets, open and close squiggly brackets. And all I want to do is long sound plays, and then, well, that was loud sound, and then the same for long sound. Long sound dot play. So what we expect to see is, well, nothing will happen straight away, but play sounds when it compiles will listen for the two audio sources. So if I play the game, nothing should happen, even when I go and open the door. Okay, no audio. It can't find the function, and it can't find, if we actually get an error down here, the animation event, there's no function that's attached because we want it to play this function. But loud sound and long sound, I need to say they belong on the door. What I'm going to need to do here is to lock the inspector. There's a little padlock up here, you press that, and that means no matter what you click on, it will always display that thing. The next thing I need to do, I want to see the door. Easiest way to do this. Window, General, I want another inspector window. Haha! Right click on the word inspector, go to add tab, add inspector. You now have two inspectors. Look at you, Inspector Gadget. What we want to do with our door selected is we've got this audio source which will live in there, and the second audio source which will live in there. It may have got this right, but just by dragging and dropping makes it a little bit clearer. And you can't name these things either, so it's not always obvious which ones I've done. I'm going to close our duplicate inspector, and I'm going to unlock this. Next thing, back to our animation, and now we can hook in to these events that we created. So this event, drop down, play both sounds. Cool, and then I'll just use that one. So that one will play both sounds, and then if I click on this event, I don't need the second event. That first event will play both the sounds. And it will happen at about the 0.3 second mark. So we're going over here. Specify cast not valid. Oh, there it is. It's playing. Not perfect, but you get the idea. So I actually think the door system, I want that to play sooner, and the door system is a thing that has this script, but the door is the emitter, so I could change its volume, or I could do whatever I liked with it, or increase its range. So they're not obvious, but this is particularly good for setting up things like if you have taken damage at a point of an animation. If you're making a melee system and you want your enemy to swing a punch at you and to hit you in the face, you want them to do damage when they hit you with the punch at a keyframe rather than when the animation starts or finishes. You know, it's the point of impact, or something like that. So where are we up to? We've used that. Okay, let's have a look at character animation states. So now what we've got is, I'm going to download the zombie that we've used before. So you can find this from the asset store if you just search zombie. I've previously downloaded it, so I can just pull it through from the package manager. And I'm going to use this as an opportunity. So that's the zombie folder, which is here. And if I go into prefabs, you can see zombie, and I'm just going to drag zombie 1 in. The object may be a little small for this particular scene. You can scale them up, it's not going to hurt. The scale tool is there if you're interested. Giant zombie, small zombie. That there seems about right. But if I go to the animator now, you will see the zombie's animation. It idles as a state, then it attacks, then it falls, then it walks, then it walks, then it runs, then it falls, and then back to idle. And you can see this behaviour in the game. Exactly what we see, and it will loop and it will repeat through those states. Whereas what is better is, in most instances, you might just want them idling. So if I deleted that transition and deleted that transition, it will just idle. If I double click, you see that it will loop, so it will repeat that idle animation. And you can see down here it's selected the animations that our zombies know. So it's idling. Tying in with our AI video before, now that you know how to change an animation on the fly through code, you could tie that in with changing the character's animation when they're in a different AI state if you wanted to. But for now we've just got our dude idling. What I'm interested in doing though is tying in with a custom animation. So this particular zombie comes with some animations out the box. Attack, falling back, falling down, run, etc. You've got these animations and they come as part of the object. But sometimes you've got a perfect 3D asset, but you don't have the animations that match. You might want a character to hide or to jump up, and that may not be a thing the object knows how to do. So this is where Mixamo comes in. Mixamo is a free website and it's from Adobe. When it signs you in, it says sign in with Google, just sign in with your college Google details. But what I've got here is I want my zombie to stand up, and there is no animation for that in the zombie, but I want him to stand up. So I'm going to choose the zombie stand up animation. I've just used the search bar here for zombie stand, and doesn't really matter which one, I'm going to go with this one. Now the mesh here, the surface doesn't matter. What does matter is the animation that's driving the character, and we're going to make that fit our character, which is our zombie. So I'm going to download this, download. You can see I've tested this a moment ago, but there's zombie stand up, and I'm going to drag and drop that into the scene. This is where things get fiddly, and if I break this, you'll have to bear with me a little bit, guys, because what we're trying to do is to make an animation that's not designed for this character fit this character. So as soon as that new animation comes through, first thing we need to do is to go to the rig, which is the bone structure for this animation, and we need to make that fit based on what's called an avatar, which is the bone structure. So the animation type I would like to be humanoid, because our zombie is humanoid, and I would like to create the avatar from this particular model and apply. What this will then do is create an animation for you. So you click the little arrow which opens it up, and you can see that there's a new animation here, which is the triangle with some lines behind it, and we're going to say I want this animation. Hopefully you can see the little character standing up in the bottom right hand corner. I would now like to apply that to this zombie. To make this work effectively, take the animation, you can copy and paste it. I'm just going to select it, Control C and Control V, which has now made a new animation separate to the object. And all I've done that for is so I can right click and rename it. Otherwise they're all called Mixamo and you can't tell which one's which. So I'm going to call this stand up. To then apply that into my animation with my zombie selected, I go into the animator and I drag and drop it into the state machine, and you can see it's got the name of stand up. With my zombie selected now, what we're currently looking at, this state machine, is the controller. So this is the zombie controller. You can also get here by double clicking on it. This controller is this state machine. You can have many different state machines for different objects. But now if I go to my zombie with him selected and I go to animation, I should now be able to choose from his animation list stand up. And all things being well, fingers crossed, because this doesn't always work for me, this will now play a stand up animation. Well, that looks good. And what you'll find is it will have moved their place, moved their position, because the animations may not have lined up perfectly. So here's the other thing we need to check. With our stand-up animation double clicked and selected, we've got, I'm just going to try and see what that looks like. So I'm going to idle, transition to stand up, and stand up back to idle, just so I can see is this a problem in game or just unique to the preview. So it's idling, and then falling down and standing up, and then back to idle in a second. Wild, he's now hovering, and I reckon they'll just carry on getting a bit taller and a bit taller and a bit taller. There you go. So we've got a zombie that now has an exciting story. Reason for this is the animation doesn't know that it's inheriting movement behaviour, and we don't want that. So I'm going to bake the root transform position into the pose, and I'm going to bake the rotation and basically everything I can bake. Let's bake it, why not? Control F to save it, and let's see, does that solve our particular problem? So we walk over, better, fixed. There you go. So you can see we bake the pose, bake the pose, we bake the pose, and that solved that particular problem. And there you go. So that's how you add custom animations from Mixamo into your own objects. There you go. Hopefully that was useful for you guys. If we just go through everything that we've covered so far today, use of character animation states and transitions we have done, importing custom character animations as well. Animation is hard. If you've got it all working, you should be chuffed with yourself. It is not a straightforward thing, but well done.